Welcome back. Now, this year's World Economic Forum has officially kicked off. Global leaders have settled in Davos with the event focused on rebuilding trust. Global security, job creation, climate initiatives and AI development are set to dominate talks at the forum. And joining me to unpack expectations for African nations is sustainability and climate leader for Deloitte Africa, Mark Victor. Thank you so much for your time, Mark. Now, talk to us about the importance of Davos and rebuilding trust in the current economic and political landscape.
I think it's an interesting Davos. There's a lot of challenges in the global markets at the moment. The challenge of the war in the Ukraine, that's 2 years underway. So I think the focus on driving more systemic interaction is really critical. A lot of countries are looking at their national agendas, and so it's important that the level of cooperation is increased. What we saw at COP last year also was a lot of pressure coming into the system in terms of the need to be able to, transition, to drive the energy transition. And therefore, the challenges are starting to get to hot up in terms of the need to execute. So I think, greater polarization between the global north and the global south, the importance of driving the whole economy, being inclusive, and therefore, I think Davos, very critical year of engagements.
Yeah. Now, Africa is there in Davos selling its investment case. How much does the gathering need Africa, and how much does Africa need the gathering?
I think there's an importance of Africa as the last really undeveloped continent. So, my take on it, I think, for the developed world is that there's lots of potential and opportunities. I think it's important for Africa to ensure the continued commitment from the developed nations. I think the other opportunity rests in the free trade area for Africa that is starting to get executed. There's great opportunities to follow a similar model to Europe. And then, there's a lot of reliance on developed markets to drive, and support job creation, growth. So I think really critical for Africa that there's an active participation, that they're demonstrating, competitiveness and commitments to continue to develop as future potential opportunities for investments for developed markets.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I actually want to zoom in on South Africa because compelling is the word that our finance minister, Enoch Godongwana, used to describe South Africa's investment case. Would you use that term?
I think, yes, I would, but there's a lot of caveats.
Yeah.
The challenges that we face in terms of energy security, in terms of the recovery plan we're trying to drive. South Africa plays a very critical role for Africa as a leading nation, and I think it is critical that we have a lot of compelling capabilities and infrastructure. We obviously do face some challenges though, and therefore it's critical for the country to really continue driving the recovery plan, sorting out energy security, addressing the just energy transition, etc. I do support that, but I think there's a lot of challenges to really convince the global markets for South Africa as a sustainable investment. But I do feel that it presents attractive investments in the long term.
Yeah. Well, it seems that there is kind of a duality wherein as much as we have all these challenges, but hoping that those challenges, investors can find opportunities in that for them to bring in their investments to the country. So, obviously there are lots of moving parts in the political landscape. It is an election year in South Africa, and there's also the role that South Africa is playing in the geopolitical landscape right now. How much will politics influence investment decisions into the country?
I think we can't ignore the fact that politics will have an impact, but I think what's critical is that there's a continued focus on the set agenda, the strategies, the reformation, etc. So, I think the country has got to focus on addressing crime and corruption, continuing to ease the ability to do business, and to focus on the opportunities. Lots of great investment commitments that have been made by the OEMs, the auto sector and others. So I just think it's critical to ensure that politics enables the South African trajectory.
Yeah, you talk about policies that enable, doing business in South Africa. And I also just, want to ask, Africa as a whole, how much ground has been covered in policy making and policies that actually make the investment, landscape fertile for the private sector to invest into the country, but also for international investors?
I think the problem is that it's difficult to do business, but in terms of the policy landscape, we've got a very mature policy framework. We've got a very well-regulated country. So it's more about the execution, in my view. Critical to be able to prove that it's easy to get in, to set up a business, to do business. Some of the externalities, as I mentioned earlier, are difficult to address, energy security, etc. But if you look at some of the statements from companies recently in the last 3 months, we need to be able to convince them that in the long term, it's the right decision to stay, it's the right decision to continue investing, and that's got to be proactively driven, both at a national level and even at a metro level, supporting private sector investment, enabling companies to prosper, and obviously then for South Africa to grow and develop and create jobs.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, you are in sustainability and climate at Deloitte, and I actually want to ask, because I mean this comes on the heels of COP28, and I want to know, what will you be looking out for there in terms of what can be built from the momentum that we did have from the last COP meeting?
A lot of focus on the commitment to move away from fossil fuels, commitments on renewables and energy efficiency. Loss and damages is also significantly supporting the African agenda going forward. But I think from a South African landscape, the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan is really crucial. Great plan, important to execute. We've got less than 5 years to really drive investment in renewables, to move away from fossil fuels, and to also reinvent our mining and energy sector. So I think the execution is the most critical element there. Also opportunities with hydrogen, lots of sort of dependencies, but significant demand starting to be seen in terms of opportunities for cross-border investments and supply and demand for hydrogen. So I think it's really got to be about implementation and execution of the plan to achieve the COP commitments that have been made globally and also by South Africa.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your insights today, Mark. Really appreciate it. That was Mark Victor, Sustainability and Climate Leader for Deloitte Africa.